Welcome, everybody, to Recruiting is No Joke. I am your host, as always, Joel Lalgee, the realist recruiter. I'm tempted to say a joke that I always say about the sign, but I'm going to refrain this week. So that just shows growth week after week. But welcome to the podcast. If you are a new listener, if you're a returning listener, appreciate all of you guys' support and the community we're building here. I have another great guest. I think we're going to have a really good conversation here around interviewing, what to look for in interviews, what to look for in terms of bringing on the right candidates, and just the overall state of recruitment and hiring. So, Napo, welcome to the show. Why don't you give everyone, for anyone who doesn't know you, give us a quick introduction, who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Joel. My name is Napoleon Rumteen, Napo for short. And I'm the founder and CEO of Interactive EQ. Interactive EQ is a talent assessment platform that specializes in honing in on people's intangible skills, specifically emotional intelligence, EQ, and soft skills.
I love that. Look, I hear the word assessment. I automatically, for some reason, my mind goes to it makes a recruitment search way harder. Like whenever I've used assessments. And also from a candidate perspective, sometimes it could be like, oh, this company's, asking me to do an assessment. This one isn't. Go with the one who isn't asking me to do it. So I'd love to know why and how, especially when you're testing for skill or when you're assessing emotional intelligence, why is that so valuable? Why is that even just missing in how we do things?
Yeah, so it's a valid point, and I've gotten a variety of responses in relation to assessment. Some of the stuff that you said, some have said, "Yeah, hey, call it what it is." And starting first with the importance of the particular area that we hone in on. There was a study. It's over 100 years old, but it was done by the Carnegie Foundation and Harvard University, and they determined that job success attribution, 15% of it was hard skills, meaning experience, education, training, right? And 85% of it was soft skills. This is critical thinking. This is collaborative aptitude, active listening, even good taste, right? And it's funny, people ask me, what about good taste? And we can talk about that a little bit more, but it's incredible that the hard skills measure someone's ability to be a task doer, but it's the soft skills that really measure someone's propensity to be a star performer, right? It's the range between being a task doer to being a star performer. And that's really what we try to hone in on. And because these skills are abstract, they're very difficult to measure. And we felt that there was a significant gap across all industries, pretty horizontal problem. And that's what we aim to tackle.
I've seen so many posts, it's kind of like that hire for attitude, train for skills. I see posts like that. I know attitude isn't emotional intelligence, but let's just say even with hire for attitude, train for skills, those posts always go viral on social media. But in my experience, in the decade that I've been in recruiting, which I know isn't that long, I guess, but it's a decade. Okay. Every single hiring manager I've worked with, it's almost like they default to experience. So I'm curious, why do you think we go to experience if experience doesn't necessarily even determine whether or not someone is going to be a superstar or they're going to be potentially the best person out there? Why do you think we default to that?
Because that's what we can easily measure. And that's the challenge in itself. Right. So, the problem right now is that when the first line is, if you're an organization that has a recruiter, great. If you don't have a recruiter, it's even more of a challenge. But let's take it from an organization that starts from recruitment. They will go ahead and take a look for baseline qualifications. And those are the hard skills, things that you can pull from a resume and social media platforms. Education, experience, accomplishments, right? And then it's kind of like the basic sniff test, maybe a quick interview to qualify, see the level of interest. And then that individual gets advanced to the deeper vetting stage. And that's usually by a hiring manager. And where I've found the wheels fall apart is at this stage from two aspects. One, as I mentioned, soft skills and EQ, these are abstract skills and very difficult to measure in a one-on-one interview. Now, you couple that with the person interviewing a hiring manager, and very frankly, they are not well trained at interviewing. It's not their fault.
100%.
Hiring managers are usually trained, if they're lucky, they get leadership coaching on existing staff, but not becoming an expert in interviewing. And I've interviewed thousands of people. I've read books about it, I've honed in on it, and I still get it wrong because I cannot peel the layer of an onion with a person and really find out who they are deep down in an hour-long Q&A like we're going through right now, whether it's remote or face-to-face.
I've always thought, just a side note, I always thought it is absolutely crazy. I mean, I don't know necessarily another kind of like way, like obviously, using an assessment, which we're going to talk about, it's going to add value. But like from like just a time perspective, like, I don't have the solution. But I do think it's like absolutely wild that for one of the biggest decisions in our personal lives, because it's the same for the candidate. I just like we vetting. It's like it's almost like saying, "Hey, I'm gonna date somebody for a week and then get married to them." Obviously, there's a difference there because it's hopefully like a longer time married. But you get what I'm saying. It's just like this crazy idea, and it's like the amount of times I have interviewed someone or screened them, and I'm like, I know this is going to be the candidate, and they do end up being the candidate because I got a pretty good sense of like, I know these people are going to mesh well in an interview, and then they were all on board, all excited. And then literally like 4 or 5 months later, I'm getting a call from the candidate just being like, yeah, it didn't work out. Because it's like, that's really like the window of time, right? So anyway, I just think completely back up what you're saying. Like, it's just such an insane concept.
Yeah. By the way, your analogy of it being a marriage, it's actually spot on because it has to be mutual. And I can't begin to tell you how many times I've said that to someone I've interviewed. I said, look, this is like a marriage. We have to mutually want to be together and take this journey together. And I want you to interview me just as much as I'm interviewing you to make sure it's the right fit for you. Going back to the point of when things fall apart, you've got now a hiring manager that is not great at interviewing. And again, I wouldn't put that on them. Even someone trained like me has fallen short. It's just difficult to ascertain those soft skills and really understand them in an interview setting. And then a lot of times decision making is done based on gut feeling. If I had $1 for every time someone came to me, a director or a VP that advanced talent to me, and I would interview them and I would say, hey, what do you see in this individual? They say, positive attitude, great energy, let's hire them. I'm like, okay, they're interviewing for a job. That's what you would expect. I said, what else? Better than some of the people we have now. And then my question is, hiring bar the bottom of the barrel.
It's like I've almost even said that I hate to say this, but in my time in recruitment, particularly agency recruiting, it's like, we can find ourselves even saying stuff like that, like, especially when it comes to current team and things like that. But I also think it's kind of going back to, that relationship analogy when you're dating somebody or you're in that first initial scenes, is like everyone's on their best behavior. Like no one goes into a first date and it's themselves. You can't even do that. You can't begin to be like the full you and like 100% authentic. And you can't you're not going to see all facets of who you are as a human, but we kind of expect that in an interview, and it's like we don't get behavior. So I'm curious from your perspective, like you've obviously had some interview training, you've interviewed thousands of people. What do you think some of the just big core mistakes that people do make with this, and what are some of those wrong judgments that they make?
First, the most obvious one I notice from the employer is the need to fill a seat. I've literally had someone tell me if they can fog up a mirror, I'm hiring them. And I think of, wow. Imagine how low that bar is set. So I wonder what their existing staff looks like, if that's the measuring stick to hire. And look, there are a lot of industries that there's a shortage of people. I mean, you look at nursing, you look at automotive and sales in some scenarios. I mean, there's a broad range of industries where there's a supply issue, and so people are settling. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, filling a seat. And then the optimism, right? Someone makes it after one round, next round, third round. They've made it so far. Other people have endorsed them. Like, you want to believe in the positives and you overlook some red flags. Instead of digging in on the red flags to kind of chase it down that rabbit hole that reveals so much more, people tend to overlook it and cling on to the positives. And I think that's where they make some errors. And then later on, when that person actually starts working, they'll go ahead and see some of those red flags really come to light.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk about EQ then. Let's talk about emotional intelligence. I mean, you mentioned a couple of the points. I think you say like curiosity, problem solving, things like that. But I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it. When you think about this whole idea of emotional intelligence, because again, I think a lot of people talk about emotional intelligence. I don't know how many times someone sat me down and gone, hey, this is what it is. So what is emotional intelligence? I guess more importantly, why is it indicative of success? Why is it a predictor of success in a role or being one of those top performers?
So emotional intelligence, or referred to by the acronym EQ, it's emotional quotient. That's where the EQ comes from. And very much similar to IQ, intelligence quotient. Intelligence quotient measures someone's just smarts, right? But EQ, the emotional intelligence, is the ability to measure, manage, and navigate emotions that you see in others as well as in yourself. So there's part of it
Mm.
self awareness, and part of it is how do I use it in terms of dealing with people? Now, that could be customers, it could also be with colleagues. It could be with family members. I mean, they are incredible skills. And if I could just throw a few categories at you, it would be the ability to read a room. So think of that from a business perspective or even a personal perspective. Business acumen, right?
Well, let's just go back to this for a second. Read the room, because I think reading the room, like I think we've all heard that, but like when we're reading the room, like what does that mean?
So let's talk about just top three ingredients that are involved in that. Visual intake, your ability to actually see something and perceive and take it in. Behavior recognition, the ability to see how just people's body language
Hmm.
are letting you know if they're open or closed to a conversation. If someone shuts down, all of a sudden you're getting these one word answers or yes or no. Now, again, whether it's a customer that you're trying to lean into and sell, or if it's a spouse that you've got a relationship with. And then also just situational awareness. Can you read a room? What's the situational awareness? Is there a sense of urgency involved in some of the decision making you need to have? So that in itself is so incredibly valuable. And if you take these less than handful of points that I just made or categories of soft skills, you can apply them in so many different aspects of business and someone's personal life. And those who are really keen and sharp with it know how to navigate these scenarios better than others.
I was going to ask you, like, what's the percentage of people that have a high EQ, but I don't know if that, do you have like any, obviously not precise stats because it's a hard thing to measure. What percentage of people are we talking about that you would say like, yeah, they have a, high EQ?
Well, I think, we've got our own standards in terms of how we measure based on the simulations that we put people through. Look, everyone's got some level of EQ, and EQ can be taught. It's not as easy. People really have to lean into it. But I would say you tend to see it predominantly in people that are customer facing or people that cross collaborate with other departments and those that are really strong problem solvers. That's where you see EQ shine. Anyone who's in a successful management role, they have strong EQ. If you look at even sports, there's an old saying, sometimes some of the best athletes are not good coaches. If you look at all the great coaches in the history of all sports, they're usually not all-star athletes.
Yeah.
Why? Because they understand what it's like to struggle. They know how to connect. They have that level of empathy, which is a big portion of EQ, to understand when someone's struggling and how do I get them out of it. Whereas like an all-star player expects everyone to be able to perform like that. How
It's
often do you
true.
see people getting hired because they're great individual contributors, and when they become
Yeah.
managers, they're not very good at it?
I see less of people getting hired into management roles that are high ICs. I see a lot of people getting promoted internally. And I think we see it mostly right in sales. Like I think that is the most common. I know like in recruitment agency world, if somebody's a high biller and they've done a lot of placements, they've done really good client development, it is automatic. They are going to have a team kind of forced under them. And you're absolutely right. It's sometimes it works out. A lot of times it doesn't, which I think is really interesting. And then I've seen it the same in sports. Like one of my favorite coaches of my favorite team, Liverpool. Shout out to any Liverpool fans. We won the league this year. It was awesome. But the old coach who kind of built the team up really, really well, he was kind of like a mid-tier player, but he's just become a phenomenal coach. And one of the things that he is so great at is he's like built this unity of the team, and you could just see like because it's different styles, right, of management. There's another manager out there who's really tactical and really good and a little bit more cold almost with the players, and like you can tell there's like a authority there, and then this other coach is more of like it's like kind of caring, empathetic, and like building relationships. They've been like really fierce competitors with each other, so it's like really interesting to even see within that like the different management styles and like the different players that respond to it.
Yeah.
And then understanding that not every player is going to even respond to that style. It's super interesting.
You've seen both have success, but I think the underlying element there to success is knowing how to bring out the best in people. And in order to do that, you have to know where are the inhibitors, where are the weaknesses, and how do we upskill those, and where are those areas where that person is struggling. And what interactive EQ does, it's not training, because training is more pushing information to the individual. It is If I put it in medical terms, training is like vitamins, right? You take your vitamins every day. If you have a headache, you take aspirin. What we do is we diagnose when you're looking at someone saying something's off, but we can't tell what it is. Instead of just
Mm.
pushing content to them, we actually go and we bring that out. We diagnose and prescribe. So we go hand in hand with training, and we come in at certain milestones, whether it's pre-placement, whether it's during the performance reviews, definitely during probationary periods, and those that are struggling. Imagine people that are on PIP. About 10% of the people that go on PIP actually end up staying. Most of them leave shortly after they go on PIP because in their minds, they're like, I'm losing my job.
Yeah.
And the employer's kind of giving up because they don't know how to turn them around. And this
Do you know, like, I'm just curious with that stat, is it more so people who are on the PIP leaving versus them actually getting like, the PIP like taking place and then them getting laid off or whatever you want to call it?
combination of the two, because a lot of times you think about what gets the person to that stage. Well, performance drops, they get a verbal warning, then they get a written warning, and that's where the PIP kicks in. And hey, you better turn it around in the next 30 days or whatever. Now, whether it's sales or it's customer success, whatever the role is, that individual is thinking, okay, I'm on the chopping block. What do I do? Because if there was something that I could do, I would have already done it. Right? Unless
Mm.
they go through this like massive rebirth and somehow it clicked. Like I said, that's
You sound very hopeful about that.
yeah. Right? But really the onus is on the organization that made the investment to bring that person on, right?
Yeah.
Now the problem with that is they don't know how to help the individual because they immediately look at the hard stats. They look at what are the numbers, which is a good place to look at, right? If you're a salesperson, for example, what are
Yeah.
your sales? Maybe they might take one step previous. Where are your prospecting activities and so forth? Oh, those numbers aren't supporting it. Here's where you have to improve. But it's missing that intangible element of why isn't this person connecting, converting? Why isn't going down the funnel? A tool like this is able to pinpoint where those areas of weaknesses are within the individual to help them improve. If executed right, people don't even have to go on a PIP when you can catch it early.
Sales always gets thrown around for performance as well. I think I used sales earlier on in this conversation. Like marketing is like another one. But as we kind of go down the list of roles within a company, I think performance gets incredibly tough to manage and define. And I've noticed this because I talk to lots of people who've been laid off. I'll often say, all right, we're going to write your resume. I want to focus on what are your accomplishments? What's been your impact? And then they're like, you give me a blank stare. Okay, my impact. And I'm like, okay, when you have your performance meeting, what are you talking about? What are your KPIs? What are you being measured to? And I mean, I'm shocked every time I ask it because there's some of these organizations people are coming from, I would like expect there to be super clearly defined KPIs and like everything to be planned out. And they're like, oh, I have no idea. So then I'm like, well, how do you know if you're doing well or not? And they don't. So I just bring that up because I think sales gets thrown around a lot with this stuff, but it's like the whole 30, 60, 90 days. It's like super easy in some fields. In others, it's really hard. I don't necessarily know how you measure that with like payroll. I mean, like obviously it's like how many people are getting paid on time. Yeah. Then what? How do you excel in payroll, right? So one of the things you did mention here, I want to touch upon, you said you can train, you can get better with EQ. So like, what does that actually look like? Because I would have thought that some of these things, they just sound like instinctive, right? Like read the room. Like how, if someone's listening to this and go, man, I'm not that great at that. I don't always know where people are at. Like what can people do to get better at this? How can you help people to grow in their EQ?
Sure. So I think one thing that's really important is the ability to diagnose it first and foremost. And so how do you do that? Again, can you pull that from a verbal Q&A? Very difficult. I mean, heck, you got therapists that spend countless hours with people trying to figure that part of it out. What we have discovered is, and it goes to a statement that we've heard so many times, and every time I mention it, I get the affirmative head nods. And that is the famous statement, you never know who you're hiring until they actually start working. And so why is that, right? So I figured if we can create a time portal where we can take a hiring candidate before an offer is made and put them in an environment where they're working and they actually have to problem solve and collaborate with others and face customers in the most realistic scenario possible where they're playing it out live in real time. Can we duplicate that well enough to be able to get genuine answers from that individual on how they would handle situations? And then can the data support who this person is and how they operate? And then be able to share that with the hiring managers prior to the offer. How much more of an intelligent decision can they make? And so that's why we created our very realistic environment to be able to diagnose these things. And then once you have the diagnosis, then you can prescribe. I used an example earlier of saying, if you are in a negotiation, right, you're trying to close a deal, or let's say customer success. We talk a lot about sales, but let's say you have an account. All right. Whether you're an advertising company or whatever, you have a customer, they are considering leaving you. You are having a conversation with them. And then during the course of the conversation, that customer's answers are getting shorter, one word answers. The connection and communication is starting to fade and you can feel it. Okay. That's where the EQ kicks in. How do you turn it around? Can you recognize that? At what point do you know when to push hard for a sale or not? At what point do you realize, hey, I've got to stop selling and close, or I've got to really get to the root of what's bothering these people? And it's not always the money. Maybe they're not getting the support. Maybe we're misaligned somewhere. People with strong EQ can recognize those. So we create these environments for them to be challenged. And if they can get it, we capture that.
What does this look like? When we talk about environment, what does that look like? How long does this take? Like, walk me through like what that would even look like from a candidate standpoint, so we can give some like kind of visualization around what this would look like.
Sure. So the candidate would engage a recruiter, and it's actually really helped organizations in their recruiting efforts because they literally brand themselves and advertise that we look for people with people-centric skills. That's very important for us, and therefore we have this assessment, if you will, or evaluation, where it's a simulated experience we want you to go through just to test your soft skills. And they set that up and they do it in a very positive way because we've had a lot of people say, well, sometimes candidates might be afraid to take those things. And the way that we frame it is, look, way too often, great talent get overlooked because recruiters either do a 5-minute sniff test, ask some surface level questions, only look at resumes and LinkedIn's, and then they make a determination and move on. I've had so many people like open to work on LinkedIn reach out to us and say, yes, you're absolutely right. We didn't even get a chance to interview. And we've got so much experience and wisdom and things that make me special that I cannot showcase. Yeah. This is an environment where they can. So recruiters will go ahead and assign an assessment to the individual. They get it via email. They log in and they're immersed in a story. And normally it's a story that they play a role in or in a fictitious company. And it's problem-solving scenario. And it's a series of email simulations. So we test their writing skills. It goes to remote meetings like we're in right now, to actual in-person meetings where the camera serves as the eyes of the talent. We actually speak to them and call them out by their name. So you would say, hey, Joel, what do you think of this situation? And it's as real as it can. And we capture their video and audio and we convert it and score it.
It's like, tell me about a time when, but instead you're going to show me about that time. Like, I don't know what they would never ask this. Tell me about a time when a customer was unhappy and how you helped relieve the situation, right? Instead of it's asking the question, it's like, all right, how long, like these environments, how long do they generally last
30 to 40 minutes.
30 to 40 minutes.
30 to 40 minutes for an immersive experience. And it's funny because we survey people who participate.
Yeah.
And we have over a 40% rate of comments in our optional survey at the end, and over a 90% positive response from the external candidates themselves saying, this was such a cool experience.
I was going to say, I mean, like, I've never talk about creating a candidate experience is like different. I think anytime we talk about this, my head's always just kind of like, this is crazy. We have an issue. Like, one thing I've noticed is kind of going back to that original kind of talk about around like this whole obsession with experience, right? And I've just heard it so many times. And like, I actually feel like in the tech world, it's become a huge issue. And what I mean by that is, so you're working with a tech startup, right? And they're like a Series B funded tech startup. I sound so cool saying that stuff. But I remember when I first started recruiting in the tech space, and it was like people obsessed with the funding. And they'd be like, all right, well, we need someone else that understands what it's like to be a Series B funded kind of startup. And then, but even more specific, they need to have gone to this school, they need to have done this, they need to, and it was just like, it's this long laundry list. And I think now it's like, we're almost at a point where my personal opinion is like tech has moved really, really fast, just in general across all, and it's continuing to move really fast. So I think eventually the tech is just going to move faster than experience does. And I think we're already at like this weird point where people are really struggling on the job market, which, I talk about that all the time. And some of these companies are still struggling to find the right person. It's time to be able to really take that, hire for attitude, train for skills seriously. And so I love that. I guess what I'm curious about is like how on earth you have scored this. Like, how do you even go about scoring like how somebody reacts? Like, I'm just super curious about that.
Yeah, so this is a 7-year-old idea. Over the last few years, we've really focused on the scoring. That was really important. And we take over 200 different soft skills. And you think, gosh, there are that many? And yeah, there
I
are
could do
hundreds.
5 of them, but 200, wow. Okay.
I mean, I told somebody, did you know that time management is a soft skill? Did you know that multitasking is a soft skill? Did you know that good taste is a soft skill? And they're like, wow, good taste.
What
What
about
do you mean?
humor? Is humor in there?
What's that?
Is humor in there as a
Yeah,
soft
humor
skill?
is definitely a part of it. Absolutely. The ability to
Should be the
connect with
number
people.
one the number one soft skill should be humor, right? If you don't have a sense of humor, I don't know. You're not breathing, in my opinion. But I'm
Yeah,
totally
I mean,
kidding.
listen, the gift of having conversation and building
Mm,
rapport, humor is an incredible tool to be able to do that
sorry.
right away. In fact, a lot of gut feeling hires come from humor and they come from aligning, oh, you like the same sports team. And then you start, making fun of the same sports team that you dislike. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we had a great conversation. But what
Mm.
we did was going back to the scoring, we took a few hundred soft skills and we started correlating them together. We started looking at their connections in different environments and scenarios. So as we started doing that, we started grouping. Then these groups, we started grouping them together even further. And I mean, a lot of them are crossing right in group categorization based on situations and the simulations that we create. And we narrowed it down to 6 broad categories: observation skill being one of them, empathy being another, problem solving, even cultural fit. And what's great about cultural fit, a lot of people ask us, well, cultural fit, kind of how do you define that? Because what's good for one may not be for the other. And we actually have settings initially that create the profile of the organization that's with us. And so, based on the talents responses, it will be categorized to be more or less likely how that organization operates and their culture. So it
So
dials that.
what break me down, because I'm curious, like when we look at culture fit, like how you got 200 attributes for soft skills. What are some of the attributes for culture? What are some of those attributes, and how are you measuring those?
Yeah, values, right? Like
Mm.
values when it comes to being customer centric, right? That's a really big thing. In some organizations, it's bigger than others. Sense of urgency. So, one of the questions, for example, we ask of an organization is, how would you probably describe your operation more? Are you the type that promotes ask for forgiveness before permission, or does an employee, do you expect them to absolutely ask for permission first before doing anything? Is it a flat organization where you have matrix reporting, or is it rank and file, stick within your respective category?
And do you
Those are
work with like HR on this, or like who do you typically work with to kind of like
Yeah,
figure this out?
we work it depends. It varies based on the organization. If you have, let's say, a smaller organization that's kind of like a startup mode but growing very quickly, it can have the CRO involved, it can have different leadership team members involved. They can pivot quickly and move quicker like a speedboat. Whereas a mature organization, it's more like a cruise ship. That might have a very robust HR team. HR teams vary based on different departments, right? And so we will work with them to be able to identify it. And sometimes, if it's a large organization, it needs breakdown within those departments to have their own type of culture. Normally, an organization will tell you we have one culture, but it also varies sometimes within departments, regions. That plays a really big factor as well. And so we're able to dial that in. But best example I can tell you is if you've got an agile organization that's prone to change, a lot of cross departmental functionalities, and then you've got one that could be very rank and file, slow to change because changes make a significant impact, so they're usually a lot more thought out. Them two may operate very differently in a given scenario. If there's a firefighting situation involved, or if there's a process change that needs to take place, the two organizations will approach it in two different ways.
I mean, you mentioned like with different regions, right? Is this something that could happen also individually with different hiring managers? And then also, I'm just curious, how many questions are you asking to like assess like even what the culture is?
Yeah, we have 12 to 15 questions,
Okay, yeah.
but they're really dialed in. And even that's got a whole formula to be able to identify the persona of the organization. And then once we're aligned on that, it's go. And then the assessments are, our AI is able to take into consideration, okay, this is the organization we're looking at, and here's the scenario we're presenting. How do they respond? What are their solutions and their reactions? And how does it fit this organization? It's really telling, actually.
I think kind of going back to particularly like the time we're in right now where we're seeing a number of things going on. One of the biggest things that's going on is these reorganizations a lot of enterprise companies are doing where maybe they grew through acquisition, maybe they just grew over time, whatever it is. We have a lot of really large organizations with really complex organizational maps. And it just seems like now they're looking to like reorg things, make things simpler. They're obviously bringing technology into a lot more positions, looking at efficiency, looking at how can we do more with less. Like these are all just things that we're just continuing to see. It is kind of scary for people because it creates unknown with their own jobs. And then you find people who are on the market. I think they're crying out really for something like this, that where we have to see some sort of shift of this old methodology of just purely relying on experience and that being the only indicator. I'm curious, you mentioned at the beginning 85% success is from EQ, 15% is from skills, hard skills. Do you think that because of where tech is, that's the same? Do you think there's been any change in that? And then I guess like, how much weight are you saying to a hiring manager, hey, here are the results? Are you saying like, hey, just completely disregard experience? Or like, what's the balance there? What's the right balance in your experience? Or does it depend? I'm just curious.
What's funny is that study by Harvard University's Carnegie Foundation, it's like 100 years old, but it was
Right.
researched.
That's what I'm thinking. It's crazy.
And it was resurfaced a couple of years ago because it was validated once again, so many years later, but
Mm.
emphasized even more now because it's post pandemic. You got a whole generation of people entering the workforce that kind of turned the corner from high school into college and now into the work world in a complete remote environment, a more disconnected environment. Take into account the remote world as well. There's a real premium on soft skills and ability to read people. And when I say that, it's not just can you look someone in the eyes and shake their hands and read them? No, it's not always in person. Can you read them and what they're trying to tell you or their apprehensions via email? In a remote
Oof.
meeting. I mean, it's gotten
Tough.
harder.
It's the best example of that is just like, your spousal relationship, right? Where it's like you start texting, oh man, you can get in your head about what people mean, but it's corporate's just to say, boss, I need to talk to you. Okay, great. Like, am I in trouble? Is this good? Is this urgent? You start freaking out. Am I gonna get laid off? And they're like, yeah, hey, by the way, doing a great job. You could take off next Friday. And you're like, why did you say it like that? It's crazy. It's such a
You
huge,
might,
huge thing.
interesting. You said, what's the value in it? And I would
Mm,
say every organization has that amazing firefighter, right? The smoke jump. That means when things are going wrong, especially with customers, they know how to diffuse. They know how to
mm,
get in. And every organization will tell you that person is worth their weight in gold because if they can solve problems and do the things that people don't want to do or they shy away from, I mean, you've got people that actually are late in responding to people's phone calls and inquiries or upset customers, slow in replying because they're afraid to deal with the confrontation, but by not responding, they're adding fuel to the fire even more. And you've got some people that are like quick to react, solve the problem. Those are incredibly special employees. Those with high EQ not only can manage those scenarios, but they can even see it coming ahead of time to circumvent,
mm.
get involved, and avoid it all to begin with. Those types of employees are gold.
It's crazy that that survey reemerged 100 years later, or the study, I should say, reemerged, and it was like, it was just reinforced. Just it's funny because it's like that old phrase, like some things never change. It is just absolutely true. Also, the reason that I'm optimistic about recruitment field as a whole, because yes, there's a lot of advancements in AI when it comes to certain parts of our field. I feel like the great recruiters I know have high EQ because they know how their clients are going to react. They know how people are going to work. They're able to tell, like, you almost have like a sixth sense, I think, of like, oh, these people, they're going to work well together. And the longer you work with a client, the more you know about them. the more you go on site. It's like, I do think you kind of have that. Like, it's some of the best recruiters I know. It's like they just are so good at reading people. I'm like, that's a hard thing to replicate. But obviously, I mean, I guess you're replicating it as well. You're able to test it as well. And I think having that reinforcement is huge. This whole idea, I'm curious, like, do you think, because you mentioned the pandemic and like how things have gone, is it harder nowadays in general? Has the room gotten harder to read, do you think? Because we've added all these different dynamics, it's harder to have like, EQ when it comes to all these different dynamics that we're facing right now. And even just like from a societal point of view, polarization, we hear about that a lot. Like, are these things making it really hard to have like an EQ where you can understand every person?
Yeah, because there's so many other channels of communication, and then there's so much influx of information that comes in as well. So, whereas before access to information was more limited, now it's more abundant, but then also misinformation. And so, when you look at that premium on EQ, it's the ability to make the connection with the individual, be able to have sincere conversations, and be able to show that genuine care, right? That empathy. That's what makes the connection. A lot of times I've heard in business, this one individual said a statement that I'll never forget. Like, you don't have to be the biggest operation. You don't even have to be the best operation. As long as you're your customer's favorite, people that you
Oof.
business with, you've got their loyalty. How do
That's
you
like
become someone's favorite? You connect with them.
people buy from the people they know, they trust, and they like, right? It's valuable. Last question here. No, we're running down on time. I am sure with what we're talking about, people are still wanting to shy away from this idea of culture fit, to kind of culture add, right? How do we get away from, or how do we avoid getting into like, hey, I just, like you said, like, we both get along really, really well. We shared some jokes. How does looking at EQ how do you protect yourself from then just kind of going with who we like, right? And like, how does data actually come in to help that situation as well? What are some of the safeguards that we got to think about as well with that?
So I think first you got to have a line of sight to it, a
Mm.
clear way to be able to pull it. The reason why I got into this was because a lot of the other tools out there just weren't giving me what I needed to be able to understand the talent. And so when you're able to get a good assessment, look, employee churn is even something that's not looked at. Normally, organizations don't look at that in their financial statement, but when they do the math on how much it's costing them in replacement costs, the
Billions.
volume and percentage, it's massive. And
Yeah.
so we've worked with a lot of organizations that when we've sat there and based on their numbers have done the calculations with them, their eyes have popped open and they've said, I've never looked at it that.
Mm.
So first, having a line of sight to what this problem costs, and then the desire to do something about it. The nomenclature of emotional intelligence and soft skills, the word emotional and soft, a lot of people say, oh, there's no room for it in business, right? You got to be pragmatic. You don't want to be emotional. You don't want to be soft. But I think the nomenclature has done injustice to the value of these skill sets. So if we call them the X factor stuff, the it factor, the intangible skills, that's made people kind of perk up and say, oh yeah, that is something I really look to, but I just never thought I can access it early. I thought it was one of those things where it has to play out in real life for us to see if we got it right or wrong. But I think if there are ways to be able to measure and really care to dig deep in that from the onset, you're able to go ahead and set the table right for massive success, because HR is different now. Historically, it used to look at employees compartmentalized. There was HR for recruiting, then there is for hiring, then there's onboarding, then training and development. But now HR is turned into the people department, and they're looking at an employee journey from beginning to end into success and promotion. And so now that they're taking a more holistic look at it, they're able to put these milestones of gauges in terms of someone's progression and growth. And I think those are the recipes, and that's the path forward to longevity, high retention, and high level of success that comes with great employees.
I love it. Well, look, where can people connect with you? Where can people, get in touch? Where's the best place for people to go?
Sure. Well, they can definitely go to interactiveeq.com and submit any inquiry or questions they have there, or they can reach out to me directly at Napo, Napo, at interactiveeq.com. And I'm more than happy to connect and answer questions they have.
Well, Napo, thank you so much for joining the show this week. Guys, look, if you interested and learning more, I highly advise going to interactiveeq.com, and also just be thinking about the way that you're really assessing soft skills, because I think it's going to matter more and more and more, particularly as I just think technology is going to keep on moving faster and faster. And I think one of the most valuable skills we're going to have is like, how do we interact with others? How do we read the room? How do we understand people who are bringing into the organization? It's massive. So, and is there a free demo that people can try as well, or kind of get a feel for, like, 'cause even when we're talking about immersive situations, I'm sure people are going to be curious as to what that actually looks like.
Sure. So we have two formats. We have a B2B format where when we engage with an organization, we'll do a meeting, but there's ways where they can actually go ahead and have not just one, but multiple assessments as samples to be able to test it out. We offer the test drive because it's an incredible experience and normally it tends to work out really well. And then we also do something, because I've always believed one of the first commitments that we made when we started this was that we would look out for people that are job seeking. And so if you're open to work, we solicit people to reach out to us. We spotlight people once a month, try to go ahead and get them. And if their assessment scores are strong, we will post them. If they're not, we won't. So it's never disclosed if it's not a positive score. But if someone scores really well, we will promote them. We will talk about where their strengths are. And we've had people that have found jobs shortly after. So it's been a cool thing and we feel great doing it.
I love that. Well, guys, I know we have a mix here of recruiters and recruiters who are looking for work and just job seekers as well. So definitely go check it out. That has been another episode of Recruiting is No Joke. I actually think maybe it was last week we crossed 100 episodes. It might even be the week before, but I know one of these episodes is going to be 100. So huge milestone for us with the podcast. Super excited about that. And as always, if you guys have questions for me, you can go to www.therealistrecruiter.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to be a guest. Feel free to reach out. Would love to have that conversation. And until next time, guys, have a good rest of the week.